The world can therefore not sit aloof to the African situation. We cannot talk global climate crisis and forget a hard-hitting poverty situation in parts of the world. I come from a place where poverty simply means you lack the basic resource for a meal a day. When you are poor, you go hungry. When you are sick, you die. And to live when poor is linked directly to the benevolence of another, usually a family or community where one lives. There is no structural support for the weak and impoverished in the society. God is often resorted to amidst the confusion and hopelessness. One African philosopher, Professor Kwame Djaba, puts it this way: the African is hopelessly spiritual because he lacks the systems to survive. However, if ever there was a time for Africa to rise as a bloc and attain the needed recognition in multilateralism, I believe it's now. Never in the history of global power play has it been this convenient for Africa to rise as a recognizable force for actual development than this time. The war in Ukraine, which I believe is an affront to global multilateral engagements, and the shift in climate discussions on renewable energies, offers real-time opportunities for Africa to take its rightful place in the constellation of countries with solutions for tomorrow's habitual conditions. By Russia's aggression on Ukraine, without any real punitive sanctions from the global community of nations, idealism with which past bilateral engagements were crafted has been breached, and now countries are being confronted with real case scenarios on partnership treaties and a realistic defining of global fault lines. This is where Africa must step in. In an organic sense, Africa's lack of development in its energy sector places it well to achieve climate neutrality by 2030. According to a recent study by GIZ, the German Development Foundation, SDG 7 can be achieved in Africa faster than any other continent because we did nothing. So we are in a fallow ground to flourish. This prospect, according to all future development paradigms, is best suited for serious economic empowerment, which must begin to explore its plausible opportunities. If progression, according to global development theory, must be reset to survive posterity, then Africa suddenly can become the leader in global development because it did not so much in the past. The current president of Ghana, His Excellency President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, in an infamous speech at the UN, said in our local dialect, and I quote, "Yeti sikaso na so komode," literally meaning we sit on tremendous wealth and yet are poor. His reference to wealth connotes the raw natural land resources still largely at disposal of Africa, and now Ghana. A cursory search on the internet through Google puts it this way for Ghana. We have about 136,000 kilometers square of agricultural land, covering approximately 57% of the country's total land area of 238,500 kilometers square, out of which a paltry 58,000 kilometers, that is just 24%, is under cultivation. Of that 24%, we still have 11,000 hectares only, which is equivalent to 110 kilometers, classified as under irrigation. What this means is that what is classified as standardized farming in Ghana is only 1.2% of the arable land available to us. This is such a sad statistics. And actually, when I was doing my research for this speech, when I came across, I had to pause and I'm like, how do we then say we are poor? You have so much land resources at your disposal and you can do nothing with it. The world is talking about climate changes, organic farming, going back to prim, if I would say, if you allow me to say prim and crude ways to farm, because the excessive use of mechanization became what we now classify as climate dangers for posterity. The world, I believe, cannot discuss sustainable development goals without drifting emphasis on a complete overhaul of the African, or for this matter, the Ghanaian agricultural practices. Mr. Moderator and His Excellency, what is of more statistical relevance is that, so in my opinion, if this situation is seen as an advantage and an opportunity, then we can make something out of our living in our continent. Women, I'm talking about women now, and their role in agricultural farming. Because in Ghana, primarily what we consider as organic farming is supported by women because they do not have the classic entry points into agriculture. If you're a woman, you do what we describe as subsistence farming. In Ghana, our rural economies are largely controlled by women. Poultry and small livestock, growing crops, and what is considered subsistence in agriculture largely is handled by women. Women constitute majority of the agricultural labor force, especially in small-scale and subsistence agriculture. Unfortunately, since official statistics do not cover unpaid work, they insufficiently represent women's actual contribution in the agri sector. Women are generally disadvantaged in productive assets, ownership of land, and most importantly, access to credit facilities. Women have been the brain behind organic agriculture in our part of the world. Women farmers make less than their male counterparts, unfortunately. Even though they put in the graft, they earn less than their male counterparts. In our farming communities, wives and daughters have historically held a secondary position as farm helpers. The increasing rise and conscientization of people on organic farming has enabled women to embrace an alternative way to participate in agriculture. Along with new agricultural models, opportunities can now grow for women in the new climate order. The ravages of COVID-19 pandemic, which are ongoing, as well as the effects of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which is also ongoing, have together conspired to raise serious alarms about the possibilities of food shortages and actual famine in many parts of the world in the coming months and years. One of the key lessons we must learn from these ongoing challenges is that we cannot continue to produce and prepare our foods in the old ways and hope to feed and sustain populations through a supply chain that can easily be affected or even halted by independent global occurrences. It has therefore become indicative, ladies and gentlemen, in the absence of feasible technology for cultivating our land resource towards mass production for our own consumption, the cycle of poverty may unfortunately remain. Needless I say, a lot of African countries have weaker currencies against the dollar benchmark due to the culture of importation and an insatiable appetite for foreign products. The economists amongst us will attest to this fact. We are buying our livelihoods when we are blessed with the natural resources to define our livelihoods. The niche created in agriculture under development in Ghana is and should be an opportunity for establishing partnerships in modern agri-technologies relevant to our climate requirements and also help in alleviating the poverty which comes with over-reliance on imported products. My call at this conference is that we need to form partnerships that can invest in the expansion of the study and research into Africa's indigenous knowledge systems in order to produce food and sustainable cash crops. We should be careful not to import ideas and methods that work elsewhere, but that may not work for us, or as a matter of fact, has become a modern climate concern for the next generation. We must be partners in developing the standards by which organic food is marketed around the world. This, I believe, ladies and gentlemen, must be the fundamental premise in every developmental discussion when it comes to Ghana. We must attempt to redefine development in terms of empowering the underdevelopment. Development is not something that you do for people. The poor themselves must be in charge. Africa must be in charge. Ghana must be in charge. They have to become owners of the process and the results. In so doing, we will give the dignity of voice and self-determination to the underdeveloped. Africa, with assistance from its European partners, must take control of its destiny in organic farming, I believe, since this is the only sure way to feeding itself now and into the future. The efforts at changing attitudes must be global, both in form and content, because that is how a fair exchange of ideas can take place. For our brothers on this side of the hemisphere, my call is simple. Let us use approximate locations to advance the study into bespoke agricultural methods that will benefit our consumption needs with climate preservation in mind. We have the land, you have the know-how, and we live next to each other. Let us therefore partner to establish a modern food court beneficial for our mutual interests. We understand, for every relationship to thrive, it must be symbiotic in nature. We therefore are willing to take advantage of your vast markets if you can equip us to meet the standards expected for entry. This underpins fair trade practices, which currently is tilted largely against the African participation. In concluding, I would say poverty and climate change cannot live together. So for climate change to succeed, we also need to reduce and alleviate poverty in Africa, and especially Ghana. Let us all come together to protect and save nature. Let us stay away from further destruction of nature's worth and blessings, and go to save nature for our sustainability and harmony through organic agriculture. We have become trustees for the future of humanity. Posterity will be an equal judge of our actions. As it stands now, the legacy we shall bequeath the next generation is sadly diminished. Some we can bring back with good policies, some we have lost forever. All of us should care about intergenerational equity and justice. It is desperately sad and a betrayal of a future generation that we have destroyed our precious habitat by irresponsible actions now. If possible, however, to argue that for our children and their children's children, we will mourn for our responsibility if policymakers and leaders all over the world understand that development can only mean development if designed with the lenses of the underdeveloped to solving the pertinent problems unique to our present habitat. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very wonderful speech. I think it's that time where we take questions and answers for our distinguished speaker. But just for the fact that I'm a moderator, I'll use a little bit of autocratic powers to ask my first question. So, we've talked about development and forming development partnerships for Africa and, of course, Ghana, of course, as well. Over time, over probably the last decade, we've seen a lot of interest from China in Africa, infrastructure, more or less like an unequal balance of trade where this one gives you infrastructure in exchange of your natural resources and all that. And so my question has to do with why have we come to this point and what is the interest of China at all in Africa? And maybe you can chip in Ghana a bit, but on a continental scale, there's that kind of interest in recent times. And so why you think we came to this point and the way forward? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. So why I think we came to where we are, the influx of the Chinese on the continent, so to speak. Of course, we've got what the world needs in Africa. That is by God's own providence. There's a lot of natural resources at our disposal. The problem is, in my opinion, is we've never been able to take stock of what we had or what we have. Or the world in the past times have not given enough recognition to the resource value that we have. So on a negotiation table between an African or Africa, a country from Africa, and say China that you bring to bear, it is always the case you go negotiating with your hands tied behind you. The economies of Africa, unfortunately, has been designed from actors that are not within the systems. So energy needs, concerns, standardization issues, having to meet a certain ideal global standard has always put us second fiddle to the actors that have come to us. So for me, it's still pillage. It is still slavery in a way. And I speak for myself because I work for the embassy. So I speak for myself. It's still pillage and slavery in a way. Because when I sit with you on the negotiating table and the tools with which I am coming is unequal or uneven to what you have, it becomes difficult for me to have a voice in the discussions. That is the situation of China and its influence in Africa. We have been in a situation that most countries from Africa have gone to China for loans, for instance. And these loans are drafted in ways that not even this generation can be able to pay their loans back. And then they come to you for your natural resources. How do you say you not give it to them when your hands are already in their mouths, so to speak? His Excellency, in making a point, I wanted to buttress that point further because coincidentally, I did my master's thesis in the fact that term limits are not relevant for Africa. And then we have to look at a complete overhaul of the democratic systems as it is in Africa. And he hits it right by saying that our systems that we practice per the term limits don't even give us options to maintain a positive status quo. You see, when you are always engaged in a system of alternation and you speak one voice and another is always talking of another voice, it becomes difficult to reach any positive end because there are always alternative voices speaking and discussing the same issues. And this is what's become of our democracy, for instance. So I don't know if I've answered you, but we've always had to go on the negotiation table with our hands tied behind us. It's unfair, but that's how it is.
All right, thank you very much. I think we'll take about 2 or 3 questions. And so I'll start with Doctor, then I'll come to you as well.
Yeah. My question is
can you please be laudable enough so that those at the back can also hear you?
Okay. My question is that in terms of local economic development in Africa, specifically in Ghana, since I grew up in Ghana, I know the role that rural women play in agriculture and feeding the masses in society. Now, my question is, you cannot tackle these issues without detailed information, that is data about the agricultural system and the families involved in this area. So what is the government of Ghana's position in this when it comes to data for planning?
Recently, thank you for your question, Doctor. Recently, Ghana invested, I think, close to about 6 billion Ghana cedi into collecting data from all the constituencies in Ghana. And I believe this involved the farming and rural communities as well. We've done what we call the data bank now, and all address systems in the country have been digitized. This is one step, for instance, that Ghana has embarked on and has become a torrid and a very troublesome discussion politically in the governance landscape because, of course, people want to be fed. You see, these very lofty ideas and interventions that we can always think of and bring about, unfortunately hits something that I think His Excellency mentioned. We are running a kind of democracy that does not allow government policies to be, if I would say, entrenched before they are moved on to a next government. Because you are given 4 years to operate. It takes, in Ghana, for instance, I can speak for Ghana, it takes about a year for the government to be settled, i.e. give all the necessary positions to the MPs and the ministers and everybody. It takes a year. And then you have the second and third year to implement manifesto policies. In the third year, you have to start preparing for the next election. You could be as good as whoever, Einstein. You have to be ready for the next election because until you have the power, you're unable to implement the policies that you have. So you see, the democracy that has been transported to us, with which I believe has not been thought through to our true culture and what we stand for, is become a bane to our development. One voice is singing white, white, all through the governance time or duration. The other voice also standing saying black, 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 and giving reasons and making arguments why black is better than the white you are implementing. You have to give ear to that voice because if you don't give ear to that voice and that voice overcomes your voice, you are no more in power. If you are not in power, then you cannot implement your policies. So, like His Excellency said, it was a great point. Like, we need to rethink what we are practicing as democracy. I think it starts from there. That is the first premise that Ghana, and I believe some other African countries which say the same kind of similar governance structures must look at. If, apart from America, out of the G7 countries, all the other countries, that's England, Germany, Russia, China, can, as a matter of fact, maintain status quo when it's necessary by their governance structure, then I don't see why Africa has a cane on its back that every 4 years you must go for an election. Every 4 years you must go for an election. So everything has become clientelism. We are selling it. We are selling democracy, buying it, and trying to stay in power rather than trying to bring about development.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. Chika, please go ahead.
I have two questions.
Can I get that?
The first one,
Kindly keep it as brief as you can, and that will allow Mr. Joseph to also respond briefly as well. Thank you.
okay. So coming over differences, how can African countries align their interests? That's the first question. And the second one is, are we ready for a woman president?
So we have. I, no, I think generally, I think that question on women presidents can go across Africa because we have East, we have West, we have South. And so it's about time. I mean, I'm a firm believer of women empowerment and women in leadership. And so I think, kindly go ahead with the answer.
Anyway, in answer to your, I'll speak to the second question before I come to the first because I have to know my dual role here. And I'm speaking for myself as a Ghanaian. Is Ghana ready for a woman president? No. That's my candid opinion. I don't think. You're asking why? Okay, of course, there are reasons why it is, we are, the kind of democracy we have, ma'am, it's so polarized, tribal, and I'm being frank, and not a true reflection of the demographics in the country. It will interest you to know that there are more women in Ghana than men, per statistics, as in the population data. But then when you come to governance, women, even though His Excellency, the current president, has done a good job in trying to bring in a lot of women actors at play in governance, women form less than 20% of the governance structure in Ghana. Most presidents have come out from the government structures. So you have a political party like now as we have it. I mean, 5-6 political parties in Ghana are about to go into the next election in 2024, and I don't even know one woman actor who is a leading actor in the political parties. By our democracy, the president will come from these parties. So if women are not making inroads in the political parties, then it will be difficult to, ascend as a leader. I don't think Ghana is at a place that a radical or an outsider can run an independent party and become a president. It's always between 2, if not 3, very strong parties that are very entrenched in the governance landscape. So Ghana, for me, in the next 10 to at least 15 years, I don't think we are ready for, I don't think a woman will be a president now. If, I don't know, per some stroke of nature, a certain president maybe passes on, because we experienced that before, and a vice president is a woman, then by proxy, she could assume the role up until when the next election is handled. But if you are going to elections and going through the very structures we have now, the classic way of, it will be difficult. That is Ghana and me speaking for myself. How Africa can align our interests. We have a lot of very idealistic groupings in the continent. ECOWAS, Central Africa, AU. But then, if I want to travel from Ghana to Nigeria, it costs me something about $600 to travel to Ghana to Nigeria. And it's 2 hours away by flight. This is across all timelines. It's so difficult to move from one place to the other. For instance, if you want to do it by road, you risk probably not even making it to Nigeria, because somewhere in Benin, somebody may catch you and put you somewhere. So you see, there are many roadblocks to our seamless cohesion, which we are advocating. And all these things, I believe, are idealistic, because the democracy that we have, my president, His Excellency Nana Akufo-Addo, has done a great job for ECOWAS now. He only has 2 years to go. Everything that he is saying or he is doing, the opposition in Ghana is against it. So the structure of democracy is such that When you are doing something which is virtuous, the other one is continuously undermining it in order for them to have the role. So Akufo-Addo may do so much for ECOWAS trying to bring us together. When he goes, I beg to believe the next person coming will do that, because he's already saying that we are spending too much money trying to integrate ECOWAS. So of course he's not going to spend Ghana's budget on ECOWAS integration. So everything now is just too ideal and too comfortable for me. We are not losing hope though, because if His Excellency, our next president, is talking about term limits being a bane for our development, then the discussion is beginning. That we have to probably rethink. Can we look at something like a parliamentary system? That if somebody comes, the person is good enough, there will be a structure in parliament that will help the person stay on for a longer term. So there's no too much emphasis on trying to get power, because we spend the duration of governance trying to be in power and get power for the next term, or leave power for our parties. And this, for me, is one huge defect of the democracy that we are practicing now. I hope I've helped in answering your question.
Okay, I think that is succinct enough. I'll take from the gentleman at the back. Please go ahead.
Is it possible? It's just like a comment. So what's the difference of the other democracies like around the world? Like because we do have like a vice president in Colombia. She's a black woman. We also have Kamala Harris right now. She's a black woman. Also in Brazil, we had Djaba for 8 years. So I don't know what's the real gender issue about the Ghana or the African countries about women being the leadership.
It's not. See, the structure to ascend to government or becoming a president, of course, is premised on a multi-party system. And as of now in Ghana, frankly speaking, there is not a lot of women representation at the echelons, at the higher levels. It's yes, women will go and vote in the general election because of outdoor suffrage, but the structures that the leaders are elected from, the representation there, per statistics, is still under 20%. And they are not, how would I say, they are not given, if it's the tribal thing, fine. If it's our culture, then maybe that may be the difference, because our culture is coming from a history of giving greater roles to men than women. So they've always more or less been in a kind of an informal setup to men. And this, unfortunately, is being represented even in our multi-party engagements. So there are not a lot of women at the places they are supposed to be. That's what I'll say.
Don't you think that the fact that there is a lack of female representation at a high level should be an argument, which should be something that should be countered, and then it will probably motivate women to get it to a high level?
I get it, but that is for hopefully the women to take it up and engage, because the platforms and the opportunities are there. But I can only speak for what is pertaining. If in the last elections, for instance, per political strategy, the opposition party in Ghana now went for a woman vice president, and it didn't cut. It didn't cut, for instance. So it is for the women themselves, I believe, to rise up and fight for these positions. Because, of course, democracy offers liberal representations for everyone. Everybody can engage in democracy. But if you decide not to engage, then the onus is on you. It doesn't rely on the other to drag you into it because you are there. The women should take the responsibility themselves.
So, can I ask another question? So
We'll take one question and then.
No, that's
Go ahead.
So you don't believe that there's a structural rejection of women in politics?
No,
I think it's all like personal initiative.
no, it's personal initiative. There's no structural rejection. The past Chief Justice in Ghana was a woman, but all these appointments were not, didn't come through elections. It was appointments to create the awareness that women can do it. So you see a lot of women who make it to the top are normally appointed. They don't run campaigns, they don't go through the structures I've been discussing. And this initiative can only be on women to take it up.
All right. Thank you very much. Just hold on. Please go ahead with your question.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Yolanda.
I think the
And actually I've been studying about female leadership with a focus on the African continent, particularly on Guinea-Bissau. And according to the results of my initial studies, there is a structural problem. This is a systemic problem. There are social norms preventing women from having access to higher level of power, despite the fact that, for instance, during the liberation fight that these different countries went through to become a nation, women were fighting side by side with men. And during those periods, and we can see it translated actually into the constitutions of these countries, we were equal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in most of these countries, we were equal. In our constitutions, we are still equal. However, when it comes to the system of politically accessing the power, it's not that women don't campaign. Unfortunately, there are systems in place that do not allow women to be top of the list. Unfortunately, due to social norms, women still comply with certain rules. There are only few exceptions that fight these rules. So this is systemic and is part of the social norms that we need to work on. It's not left to individual women. It's not because women are not working to have access to positions of power. We can see, for instance, women accessing power on the continent at highest level. We have the example of Ellen Shirley Johnson in Liberia. It's not that we never had a women president on the continent. We have this example. We have the example of Banza in Central African Republic. We have the example of the one, I forgot her name now, from Malawi. We
Tanzania.
currently have one female president in Tanzania.
Tanzania, yes.
Obviously, she wasn't elected as the president, the primary incumbent, but she was the vice president. By the president dying, the men who were there in power, who were supposed to guarantee that the constitution is respected, they were fighting her because she's a woman and they didn't want her to have access to power. So it's not because women do not want to have access to power. It's not because women don't have the capacity to have access to power, but it's because we have social norms preventing us to have access to power. It's also because, unfortunately, we still have systems that do not allow us to advance fast enough. But we are still fighting the system, and we are still getting there. And if you look, for instance, at other levels, we are there. For instance, in Rwanda, you have more women in parliament than men. But why is it that? Because the issue of women is not seen only as women's issue. It's seen as a societal issue, and we have men fighting for women. We cannot do it on our own. It's a society, so we have to work together. You were speaking about solidarity. So within our countries, and in terms of gender, we also have to have that kind of solidarity for us to move ahead together.
Thank you very much.
I'm happy there's an awakening. It looks like this issue touches close to the heart, and it's woken a lot of people up, and that excites me. Just to say this as a brief message to all of us, we can make this an informal session or a formal session where we have that kind of discussion, because we still have some time until we have the event with the ambassador of Burundi. Then after that, we have our cultural event. And so it's more like an informal section where we can just have that discussion amongst ourselves. So please go ahead with your answer.
Oh, that was not an answer. That was not a question.
Oh, it was not a question.
It wasn't a question, but thank you very much, madam, for that submission. Yes, you are very, very right. I made a point about social norms. You know, it takes it's a journey to try and change the culture of a people. Coincidentally, my very immediate boss is a woman, the ambassador of Ghana to Germany. Her Excellency Gina Blay is a woman. But I spoke largely at what pertains in Ghana and my understanding of where the culture is presently. No, I mean, beating about the bush. What goes into ascension into governance largely reflects the social norms that you talk about. So our politics, unfortunately, is still very tribally centered. And even the selections of vice presidents are done in a way to represent the demographics, the population demographics in the country. So you get, for instance, a president coming from the eastern region. By all means, you have to have a vice from the north. And then you should have the finance minister maybe from the west. You know, so these very entrenched social norms still plays a very big role in our governance structure. That is why I'll go back to this thing we call democracy. Is it time for us to have a relook at it? Must it reflect more of our culture? Because it seems that we've married something that we didn't probably understand. You know, we have kingmakers who lack understanding of who the kings must be. So it's cheap to go to an African in an election period and pay, as the other speaker said, 15 euro worth of money. And for the next 4 years, the person is ready to negotiate their sovereignty for that amount of money because they don't even understand. They don't understand what is at play, what policies are being made on their behalf or against their behalf by these people they are elected. So I think the discussion goes beyond just the social norms, but we've come to a point that we have to relook at this thing and make it more bespoke to our culture. I believe if Dubai is doing what it's doing and is moved from being a desert to where everybody wants to go to just in 50 years, and they've maintained the kind of system that was akin to their culture, then we must look at things like that. That's my personal opinion, because unfortunately, the social norms and its horns are very, very, very entrenched, and they're everywhere. They're everywhere. So if the social norms reflects our governance, then there's something wrong with the source.
Great. That looks like a lot to take in for most of us. I'll take one last one and then we should have a break because I'm sure most of us are tired. But bear in mind that, like I said early on, we have the event with the ambassador of Burundi and then our cultural event as well coming up. And so I'll take probably one or two, one from the gentleman at the back, and then I'll probably do the last take, and then we can call it a day for now until the next two sessions. So please go ahead with your submission.
Thank you very much. My submission is, I'll take that simple and very short. It's the same about the issue with the women, their positions, politics, and being the president in Africa. For me, I would say that we are comparing a really young continent to a really well-established and developed continent across the globe. So when we take developed countries, for example, even up to now, I think women are still fighting for positions in the higher world, not just Africa. But Africa is a really young continent. I mean, the continent is very old, but the putting together of the whole nation or the country
discourage or say women are not important in decision makers or in decision making, let's put it that way, but rather women are really good advisors when it comes to setting up a home, a business, and also even managing money, as our culture teaches us. And for us to divert away from it and understand and give women more power, it will take time. I'm not saying, and when you look at the way Africa is going, we are even doing it very fast because we are very young and already we have presidents, we have representatives, we have a lot of them in parliament. When we take it back to the developed countries, it has taken a really stretched period of time before women were even given positions to vote and before women were even given positions at high levels. So I just want to say that women are very important and we regard them and we respect our mothers and our sisters. And of course, we are welcoming them into positions, but I'm just saying that we are very young and we are steadily progressing and developing as a continent, and we are doing really well in a very speedy way, and we should continue doing it. And I think at the long run, we'll get to a position where everything will fall in place. Thank you very much.
I think he has summed up more or less my closing remarks, if I had any. And so at that point, we would like to say a very big thank you to you for joining us, Mr. Joseph Osei Djaba. We're happy to have you here, and please give a round of applause for him. Like I always say, the conversation doesn't end here, so we can just go outside, engage him, engage other people around us. I'd be happy to share a few ideas that I may have as well. So thank you very much for joining us, and stick around. We still have 2 sessions to go, and thank you. It's been an honor. Thank you.
Thank you.